Hello everyone, it's Fjarlar, and I just decided I would make a quick video about these Christmas quote gift unquote packs that they are going to release very soon. I just want to give a quick analysis and some personal thoughts on maybe what you should choose. So without further ado, let's just get started. Now perhaps the most obvious choice you can make is to just not buy these packs at all. If you think gachas are a horrible scam and you think they don't deserve any of your money, then more power to you, I respect that. But let's assume that you're actually going to buy these packs. Let's start with the character pack. The first question I think you would ask is whether you should get a completely new character or if you should take the 60 shards that you can get from the bag and boost one of the characters that you've been working on. Now the majority of players are probably going to go for the former, but I do think there are some good arguments to be made for shard boosting one of your characters. So let's consider 4 different players at different stages in the game. The first player is a newer player with very few SSR characters. The second player is a mid to late game player who is still trying to clear maybe some of the hardest boss fights in the game, or trying to S-rank their Ancient Beckoning. The third player is a late game player with all the standard PvE content cleared. They can just sweep it every day, but they also don't really play PvP, maybe not at all, or maybe they just play it very casually. And let's say the fourth is a hardcore PvPer. Now obviously for any of these players, an option is to just choose any character that you like. But moving past that, I think the first player here should definitely choose a new character, and of course they should probably choose either a major PvE character or a character that bonds those characters. I think that one is pretty straightforward. The second player that's still trying to progress content can try to obtain a character for missing bonds if that's still an issue for them, but I actually think for this player, shard boosting is actually an option in case you want to clear a boss much earlier than you would have otherwise. Now I know what some of you are thinking, why not just tell this guy to wait another 20 days so that he can get the 60 shards? I think this really just comes down to play philosophy. If I get a shiny new 3-star character, unless that character was meant for a bond, that character is really not going to be doing anything anytime soon. And if I'm close to clearing a boss fight or something, getting those extra shards might be enough to push me over the threshold to clear that boss, in which case I'm getting better resources from higher tier clears sooner than I would have otherwise. Now the third player here should almost certainly choose a character they don't have. Pretty much because, well, you're kind of in a comfortable place, so at this point you're just sort of collecting the characters, or you just get characters that you like, so just pick who you want at your leisure. As for the final fourth player, who is a hardcore PvPer, once again shard boosting can be a viable option here if you think that is what you need to hit a certain star threshold for the next playoffs or something. Now I personally really enjoy collecting the characters, so even though I actually do play PvP quite a bit myself, I'm also the type of player who rolls on banners he doesn't really need to get characters just to have them. But I would like to put forward one last argument in favor of choosing a new character over just sharding up an existing character, even if you think there are no bonds left that you need. And that's just simply that we don't know what Zlong is going to be doing in the future. Characters that were previously not important for bonds might suddenly become important in the future. Now with all that being said, let's look at the characters themselves. Now this is definitely a lot of characters to go through, so I'm just going to try to organize them into certain groups. Now these groups aren't necessarily going to be ordered by me in some kind of descending desirability order, well at least not all of them anyway. Let's just get into it and maybe you'll see what I mean. So first, I'm going to put Sherry at the very bottom of the list. Now this is actually intentional for obvious reasons because Sherry is free, almost everybody got her at the start of the game, and even if you didn't, it's really not that important that you get her. She does bond Almeida, who is definitely a very nice freebie for new players, and still quite good in a number of the boss fights, but probably not so much that you need to go out of your way to obtain Sherry just for that. Next I have a group that says rerun very often. Now don't make a mistaken assumption that I think these characters are not actually good picks in case you really want them. In fact, almost all of these characters are very powerful PvE characters, and many of them would be quite a decent choice. I just think it's worth considering, even for newer players, that these characters are rerun very often, on the 4th banner of each patch cycle. Now so far, the 4th banner of each patch cycle has featured 3 of these characters, and many of the same banners have actually been run multiple times. What this means is that these characters appear relatively reliably. It's not like some other characters where they might not appear for 5 or 6 months, and then even when they do appear, they might not even be on a Destiny banner. It's just worth remembering that these characters are run often enough so that if you're patient, you can probably grab them off a Destiny banner eventually. At least as far as we have seen so far. Next, I'm going to group a lot of them into a group that just says they bond niche characters or no characters. What I also didn't mention here is that most of these characters really aren't essential to your progress at all. Some of them might be very good units, in fact most of them are. So let me just go through each of them one by one very quickly. Akka is a niche character and she only bonds Renata. Illustrio is still a very powerful character in both PvE and PvP, but she bonds nobody. Angelina still bonds quite a few characters, including most importantly Rachel, and she herself is quite a good unit, but none of the characters she bonds are absolutely essential. Brenda is kind of a niche character, and she only really bonds Shalinka and Helena. Betty is kind of a niche character, and she bonds nobody. Clara is still a very good character in both PvE and PvP, but she only bonds Alfred. Emilia is a niche character, and she bonds nobody. Helena is a pretty solid character, especially in Season 6, but she bonds nobody. Knight of Mystery is still a very good character as well, but she only bonds Elucia and Oliver. Lambda is a relatively niche character, and even though she bonds a decent number of characters, they're pretty much all niche themselves. Licorice is one I actually feel like highlighting a little bit here. Now, currently she only bonds Renata and most importantly Florentia. However, I do think it's worth noting that if they continue adding Tensei Dark Path characters, I can definitely see Licorice bonding more of them. Listel, still very powerful, but does not bond anybody. Noemi, also a good character, but also bonds nobody. Omega, still really nice for cheesing PvE, but only bonds Gizaroff. Rainforest is a pretty good character, and he bonds a decent number of niche characters like Brenda, Varash, and Shalinka. Renata is a niche character herself and doesn't really bond anybody. Sage of the Trees is a very good character that bonds nobody. Shelfanil is still quite good in both PvE and PvP, and she bonds quite a few characters, although none of them are necessarily essential. Dubai is a pretty good assassin, and she also bonds Florentia. Varash is a niche character that bonds Helena and Brenda. Wheeler is still a popular choice and will continue to be a popular choice of healer in the future, but he only bonds Serena, so take that into consideration. So with pretty much all these characters, it really just comes down to, do you need this character to bond another character you have, or are you just interested in this character specifically? I guess that sort of applies to just this entire list in general, but I think it applies especially so with these characters. Finally, I'm going to organize the rest of them like this. First, you'll notice the Has Main Character Powers category. It's pretty well known at this point that the main characters from each Wikigrisser game tends to bond a ton of characters. So of course Ares, D-Heart, and Sigma are all here. They all bond tons of characters, and Ares himself has probably a huge bonus because he is an S-rank character in PvP. D-Heart also deserves a special mention because he bonds so many important PvE characters like Luna, Tiaras, and Sophia. Of course, Landius, Layden, and Elwyn could also fall under this category, but as mentioned earlier, they get rerun pretty often, whereas someone like Ares gets run actually pretty rarely. Lastly, I have Zerda in this category. She technically isn't a main character, but she's quite important in her own ways. Not only does she bond Yulia, who is a very powerful character, but she's just a great unit herself, and she continues to be the only meter strike buffer, which isn't only important for PvP players. Finally, at the top of this list, though not necessarily the most important, I have listed characters that are going to be bonding very soon to come characters, or I just think they bond especially important characters in general. Florentia was probably the most popular choice from this bag on the Chinese server. She's going to be used for bonding Hilda, and she's just a really good unit herself. Gerald and Layla is here for one reason only, and that is because they bond Tiaras. Players who have been around a long time will be lucky enough to have had a free Gerald and Layla given to them, but unfortunately that has not been rerun on the global server, and it's unlikely it will be anytime soon. So I actually don't think Gerald and Layla is a bad choice here, especially considering how rarely you actually see them on banners. Gizaroff is here because he bonds Kruger. Elucia is going to be bonding Vincent, and she also unlocks a bond for Melania, who can be useful for a couple PvE players, so that's still worth noting. Young Jessica bonds Tensei Jessica. Lanford bonds Rosenseal, who is probably one of the most important characters added for the next couple months. I have put Maya here as well, because she bonds Ares and Rosalia, both being very powerful PvP characters. Rosalia is also here not just because she's an amazing character by herself, but she also bonds Mariel and Werner, both upcoming characters and both pretty useful. And finally, Shalinka is here because she bonds Kruger. If you are a very dedicated Dark Faction or debuff style box player, Shalinka could definitely be a choice here. Now, I know that was a pretty surface level and brief summary for me, but if I was going to be super detailed in the pros and cons and picking each one of these characters from the bag, this video would probably be like 90 minutes long and nobody wants that. But just giving my personal opinion, I think for longtime players, Florentia and Lanford will probably be the most popular choices here, simply because of how important both Hilda and Rosenseal will be. Those two characters are not only going to be useful in Season 6, but they just look like characters that will be viable for a very long time to come. For newer players who are still missing lots of bonds, I definitely expect them to be picking one of the main characters, just because of how many characters they bond. Out of all of them, I probably recommend Ares first, because he's a very good unit by himself, and he's just going to be bonding a lot of the Tensei characters going forward is my expectation. As mentioned, D-Heart bonds the ever-important Tiaras, Luna, and Sophia, but D-Heart himself is kinda lackluster right now. So with that done, let's talk about the equipment bag. I actually consider this way more straightforward. You'll probably hear this from a lot of players, including myself, and that is just that one item stands head and shoulders above the rest, and that is the Swordsmith emblem. This item is just so unreasonably powerful. I mean, it was just a mistake that they even created it in the first place, but since it exists, if you're gonna buy the equipment bag, I would highly recommend that you get the Swordsmith emblem. Even if you already have like 2 or 3 of them, I think even more can still be useful. Beyond that, I think the Twilight Star and the Juggler plushie are both very good accessory choices. You'll notice that I do have a bias for getting an accessory over any other slot, and that's mostly because not only are we allowed to get drops from dragons, but we are also allowed to gamble for 3 of each of the other equipment slots every week. Now sure, bad luck can still get the better of you. I mean, I'm still sitting here with 0 Scepters of Divinities among some other items, but even with that, I would pretty much always choose a good accessory over another slot if I was to get one for free. That being said, the Tenios headdress, Tyr's helm, Last Rites, and Scepter of Divinity are all pretty solid choices if you really think that you need them. You'll notice that I did not put the Extreme Magic Bow or the Ullr's Bow here. Now with Ullr's Bow, if you have a very specific build that you don't have completed, for example if you're using Illustrial and you really need that Ullr's Bow, then I can see justifying that Ullr's Bow, but otherwise I just don't see very much reason for it. With the Extreme Magic Bow, I would feel the need to point out that the Crystal Dagger is coming out soon, and for quite a few assassins that's going to be an even better weapon than Extreme Magic Bow in a lot of circumstances, at least in PvP. In PvE, having an Extreme Magic Bow isn't that important anyway. You can get by just fine for the most part with the Bloody Melody or the Hydra's Bow. Finally, you'll notice that I put Overlord Badge in its own special category. I consider the Overlord Badge to be a huge trap choice. Now sure, it looks really nice on the surface. Plus 5% to all stats, it's got HP and attack, it's immune to mobility down. Sounds like it'd be pretty good for a lot of tanks and a lot of DPS even. But the thing is, for pretty much every single tank there's always something better. Now the Overlord Badge does provide a lot of quality of life in that I can just be really lazy and not apply Sage's Hat or cast Mass Resist or anything like that. Take all those rams from those cavalry in PvE and not care about Moby down. But ultimately I consider that kind of a quality of life thing. Don't really think that's worth it. I personally would sooner just keep the $20. But anyway, that's all I gotta say today. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you think I am totally wrong in my assessments. If you plan on buying these bags, and if so, what are you going to choose? But all that being said, Merry Christmas everyone, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays, whatever. Have a nice Christmas day everyone, and I hope to see you in the next video.